ditched what they call illogical plans to force them to take tests. So you have to take your PCR test. You test obviously often to leave the country to go where you're heading if they're requiring it. But then to have to take a test to go back to the country, even if over the summer you've been double vaccinated and you've gone to another green list country and then you come back to this country, you'd still have to take expensive PCR tests. Why would that be necessary? Let's talk to Dr. Bharat Pankania, who's a senior clinical lecturer at University of Exeter Medical School and an infectious disease management expert. Good morning to you.
Hello, good morning.
Really appreciate you joining us. It doesn't really make sense, does it, if we know how well the vaccines work, for us to require someone coming from Britain who's gone to, let's say France is in the green list at some point by June, and then they go over there and then they can just show vaccination proof to get to France, but they would have to show PCR negative test to come back to Britain and then and not be allowed just to say, but I've been double vaccinated. Does this suggest that the government doesn't trust the vaccinations work?
I think the government is afraid of criticisms, and they've had a lot of it with respect to, for example, not managing to put India on the red list a lot sooner. And therefore, we end up with all manner of series of hurdles to cross with respect to people taking holidays abroad. Now, with respect to vaccines, they do not work 100%. The range is about 95% efficacy. Therefore, there will still be a small proportion of people, and we don't know for sure, but I estimate about 5%, who may not be fully protected despite having had the 2 jabs of the appropriate vaccine.
But we know that even the PCR tests are not as
Yes.
accurate. They're more accurate than the lateral flow test, but we're told actually
Yes.
it's very likely that it'll be lateral flow tests that are required to get on the plane to return to this country. And we know that they have a huge fail rate, to the extent that to being, frankly, all but useless on people without any symptoms. In which case, look, nothing's perfect. Certainly not the system where we allow Indian diplomats and all other diplomats to come to this country without any self-isolation. Because apparently someone told the coronavirus that it doesn't work on people who've got diplomatic passports.
Yes, you are right, and nothing is perfect, and this is where I feel we start to lose the wood for the trees, because as a clinician, the blindingly obvious is. The test is one armament amongst many others that you should be deploying. And the narrative we've got is, I tested negative, therefore I'm okay. That's just not true, because as you clearly said, the PCR can be inaccurate. The LFD, the lateral flow devices, they're also even more inaccurate. And therefore, the narrative should always be a negative test result in the presence of signs and symptoms. Caution. A negative test result should be taken with care because you could still be infectious. And all that conversation should be given to everyone so that it becomes part of the norm and people start understanding what these results mean.
But for the rest of time, not taking a test within the last 10 minutes, I could have COVID. Even having a double vaccination, even living somewhere where there is no COVID. I mean, the reality is we're going to have to learn to live with this disease. And I had some worrying conversations with cabinet ministers the last week suggesting we're going for a zero COVID policy, which I'm sure you as a medical expert will know is completely and utterly impossible. By all means, let's get it to the lowest level we can within reason. But realistically, we need to get back to normal life. And part of normal life, unfortunately, is that people will sometimes be having diseases. If people are coming from areas where it is highly still raging, absolutely makes sense to have testing and isolation. But people coming from other countries with a similar prevalence to us, high vaccination rates, surely we just have to get back to normal life as soon as possible.
And I don't disagree with you. What I am repeatedly saying is we have an over-reliance on one single line of failure, which is I tested positive, I tested negative, end of story. That is just not right. Science is a lot easier than politicians make it. And the science, as a scientist, I would say, you use the full armamentum of your control measures, vaccination, testing, assessment. You review that there is an outbreak. And if there is an outbreak, you do test, trace, control, isolate, all those things. All of those measures working well will keep us safe.
Dr. Bharat Pankania, thank you very much indeed for joining us. 7:45 is